Welcome to this McGraw-Hill Education webinar, Vocabulary, Why, and How. I'm Kelsey Jenkins with McGraw-Hill Education, and I will be the webinar moderator for today's session. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being presented in listen-only mode, which means you will be able to hear the presenter, but they will not be able to hear you. However, that does not mean we do not want you to participate. We, of course, want to hear any questions you have, so please type them in the Q&A chat box to your left. Joining us today is Dr. Marcia Roy, one of the authors of Open Court Reading and the past Director of Professional Development for SRA McGraw-Hill Education. She has spent a significant amount of time in classrooms developing reading and writing curricula, as well as working with teachers and administrators in the implementation of instructional practices. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Marcia Roy, and I will hand it over to her.
Oh, I'm sorry. I started choking.
Are you okay?
Yes, I am, everyone. What a way to start the day. Anyhow, welcome and thank you, Kelsey, for the kind words. And hopefully I will not choke again. I have no idea what that was all about. But today we're going to be talking about vocabulary, the why and the how. And vocabulary has really become a very critical component of education. It used to be taught sort of as part of reading, part of comprehension, but never with the intentionality that we know that we need to teach vocabulary. And you'll notice on this first slide that we're talking about vocabulary not just as the meaning of words, but shades of meaning, word knowledge, morphology, the impact of academic vocabulary, and comprehension. Vocabulary has wide-reaching impact in the lives of children. So let's take a quick look at this cartoon and see how vocabulary is from a child's perspective. And if you take a look at this cartoon, this little boy is saying to his mother, my teacher said, excuse me, that school has tough new standards and I need to improve my vocabulary. What's vocabulary? And I think that's important for children, and I think it's important for us as the educators. Most children in our classrooms today think vocabulary is just giving the meaning of a word. And if they do it on a test, they write it in a sentence, and then they forget it. The whole point is that vocabulary is something that becomes part of the very being of every student, that becomes part of his lexicon, the whole vocabulary package that he or she has, and is going to be used not just to understand what they are reading, but also to use in their writing. When we take a look at vocabulary, there are some things that we know. We know, excuse me, that the highest rate of vocabulary development occurs during the preschool years. Young children really absorb all kinds of language during these early years. And many of these words that children learn are basically what we call those tier 1 words, the common nouns, determiners, and so on, that are part of most young children's vocabulary. We also know that the quality, quantity, and responsiveness of adults impacts children's vocabulary development. The more we talk to children, the more interesting words we use with children, the more we encourage children to use words, the better their vocabulary will be. You know, we always think of this as parents talking to children. But as an educator, as a teacher, I want to say that it is about us, too, adults, talking to our children. It's the quality of our language. It's the quantity of our language and the responsibility and the responsiveness, of our language that is going to impact our students' vocabulary. We also know that vocabulary predicts growth and comprehension. We don't know whether vocabulary develops because of comprehension or comprehension develops because of vocabulary, but it doesn't matter. The fact is that children who have good vocabularies tend to be better at understanding text. And lastly, effective vocabulary intervention can impact reading difficulties. We can make a difference later on as students go through our schools, but it is so much easier if we work on vocabulary from preschool on, so children come with all the tools they need to make sense out of what they are learning, reading, and writing. So by kindergarten, the number of words in a child's oral vocabulary is the strongest predictor of his or her reading comprehension in the future. So learning about words is key. How are words acquired? Well, there are a number of ways that happens. First is exposure. Young children are exposed to a wide range of different words, sentences, phrases, and they begin to incorporate these into their own vocabulary. They learn without much conscious attention. They don't sit there and say, I need to learn this word, or you don't sit there as a parent and say, you need to learn this word. But it is part and parcel of our language with children that allows them to learn without that conscious attention. They infer the meaning of many words. If you hold up a pencil and you say you write with this, and then you actually physically write, they begin to make that connection. And gradually they can infer that if you can write with a pencil, you can write with a pen. If you can write with a pen and pencil, you can do it with a crayon. So they begin to infer the purposes and the meanings of words. But we also know that words can be acquired through instruction. And we're going to spend the bulk of our time today talking about instruction and how we can help our students become better users of words, more conscious of vocabulary, and more interested in learning about words and language in general. There are some things that we know. And what we know is that by the beginning of kindergarten, the average student comes with about 3,000 words in their roots in their vocabulary. And by roots, I mean they'll know the word. We're not counting the word walk, walking, and walked as 3 words. We're counting the root, and the root of those 3 words is walk. Girl, girls. The root is girl. So young children come with about 3,000 roots. By the end of grade 2, we begin to see a discrepancy. Those in the lowest 25th percentile have about 4,000 word meanings. The average child, about the 50th percentile, has about 6,000 words. But the child at the top, in the 90th and above, has about 8,000 words. What does this mean? And it is a critical point here. The child who is reading and who has the tools to understand text acquires a greater number of vocabulary words. The more vocabulary words you have, the better reader you are. The better reader you are, the more vocabulary words develop. If we go back to a concept that many of us are familiar with, the Matthew effect, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Those with a good vocabulary enjoy reading, learn more words, become better readers, and develop a greater number of words in their vocabulary. Those children who have the least number of words, are the least interested in reading, and the least comfortable reading, do not develop their vocabulary at the same rate. The rich get richer, and the poor get poorer. And this is why vocabulary learning, expanding students' understanding of how words work is so critical, because we want everyone to start off on the same footing. Vocabulary is the largest determiner of the comprehension of language. Not just reading, but reading, writing, and oral language. So how do we further vocabulary acquisition? We recognize that learning vocabulary is more than a skill. And this gets back to that silly little cartoon that we started with. You know, this isn't about taking a test, memorizing the words, and taking a test. This isn't a skill. This is really a lifelong activity. And we need to realize that we're going to be teaching children how to use language over time. And every year, for the rest of their lives, whether they're in school or not in school, they are going to be learning new vocabulary. This is not a one-shot deal. And just because we teach children 300 words a year in a grade level doesn't mean that they shouldn't be learning many more words throughout the grade at the same time that we are formally teaching it. Vocabulary learning takes place throughout the year and over and across years. So we need to ask ourselves, what words are we going to teach? How do we know which words to teach our children? Well, one is just to take a look at the words with children who have large vocabularies. What are the words that they bring at kindergarten level, at first grade, and second grade level? What are the words that they have experienced? And we know that there are corpuses or collections of words like Andy B. Miller's Words Worth Teaching that will help us as teachers identify the words that we need to teach children so everyone has that equal footing. We need to select words intentionally. It isn't just words that we find interesting or funny, but words that really impact the understanding of what children are reading and that will help them in their writing. And you know, with the state standards now, one of our goals is to introduce children to more challenging text. And that means if it's more challenging text, vocabulary load is a bit different. It's not going to be the more common words, but more interesting words, words with shades of meaning, text-specific words, and they're going to be embedded in sentences that are longer and more interesting. So we really have to take a look at the words that we're going to be selecting and select them intentionally to help our students read and understand more complex text. We need to take a look at those high utility, important, or useful words. Words that children are going to see within literature over time, consistently, that they're going to see in content area over time, words that are going to help them make sense out of a specific text that they're reading, but that have the probability of occurring again and again. We want to intentionally choose the words that are going to support comprehension. That means that we have to take a look at the text that we're teaching and say which words are the words that will help children understand, at least the first round, the meaning of the text. Then when we go back and do a reread or a second or third read, we may want to add other words that get at the deeper meaning of the text, the adjectives and the adverbs that will help students begin to better understand the deeper meaning of the author's writing. And we need to start thinking about those academic words, the words that are often associated with content area reading. And we have to select those words because those are often words that are not available through context or inferences. These are words that our students just need to learn. I want to take a minute to talk about what vocabulary instruction should not look like. And I think that is important because sometimes we get so lost in our own routines, our own way of teaching vocabulary that we need to think about it and reflect on it as educators, so we provide the best information to our students or provide the best instruction to our students so they are learning words and becoming users of those words. Memorizing meanings is not what it is all about. Just think about how we ask students to memorize spelling words. They memorize those spelling words, they take a test on them, and then they go to use them in their own writing, and they misspell them. Well, the same thing happens with vocabulary. Children memorize the words, they take a test, they may do very well in the text, but the next time they come to that word in a text, in a piece of written text, they don't know the meaning. The next time they go to do some writing, they don't use those words because they have learned, our students have learned, the goal of vocabulary is to learn the word, take a test, and then it doesn't matter anymore. We need to change that. Looking words up in a dictionary is not effective at all, particularly for our lower performing students and our second language users. Looking a word up in a dictionary often creates more confusion than clarification of the word. Why? There are multiple meanings given. There are different definitions given. There are definitions that use words that the children don't even understand to start with. Looking words up is time-consuming and not terribly effective. Copying meanings is like copying spelling words. It's an exercise. It does nothing to enhance learning the meaning of words. One of my favorites is group consensus. And the students will be reading something and the teacher will ask, who knows what blank means? And the hands go up. No one really gets the meaning, but everyone is willing to say, oh yeah, it's like this or it's like that. And just think of students sitting there saying, so really, what does this word mean? And that's connected to the next point I want to make, which is accepting poor examples. We are all concerned about children's perceptions of themselves and positive perceptions. But having a student give an example or a sentence using a vocabulary word that is incorrect doesn't help the student and it doesn't help the class. And so many times I've heard students coming up with an answer that is really somewhat, I must say, off the wall, and the teacher will say, that's a wonderful thought. Not quite what we're looking for, but that's a wonderful thought. Can someone else help? You know what? It might have been a wonderful thought, but children need to know it wasn't the correct wonderful thought. And we need to begin to appreciate how we can respond to students and let them know the answer wasn't on target, that it wasn't the correct response, and maybe that means we need to do some scaffolding at that point in time by giving some examples of what the word means so the students can then have some data, basically, to come up with an actual useful meaning of the word. Instruct. We need to instruct our students in how to use these words, how to figure out the meaning of words, whether it's from text, whether it is using information from other sources, whether it's learning the words, whether it is structural elements. We need to provide our students with the tools to do that. But we also need to build, as we are working on words with our students, a curiosity about those words. How did they come to be? How can we use the information we already know about a root and affixes to figure out meanings of words? We need to challenge our students to explore words, to become word scientists, So they learn about words, are curious about words, and continue to explore words and build their word knowledge, not just their vocabulary. So we need to provide opportunities for explicit and implicit instruction. We need to help our students we need to select words intentionally. And we also have to allow students to select the words that they don't understand and share those with the class and begin to discuss why that word is important. How is that going to help us understand the story or the text that we're reading? Have both the students and you as the teachers select words for future study so students feel like they are engaged in the process. And then we need to build word meanings. Words don't have just one definition. They may have many definitions. And we need to help our students explore those many definitions so they can use words in interesting and diverse ways. And lastly, we need to provide repeated exposures to words. And that's a real challenge because if you pick up 2 different texts that you are going to have your students read within a couple of months, and you choose the words that you are going to teach, you're often not going to see them repeated in one of the other texts. So in text A, you choose 6 words that you're going to teach, and you go into text B, and those 6 words don't exist again. So the challenge then becomes to us, how do we provide repeated exposures? Well, one obviously is to do some rereading and get at the deeper meaning of those words. Secondly, to have our students use those words in their writing so they begin to directly apply it to a situation where they will have to use it in a meaningful way. It is a repeated exposure. Isabel Beck has all kinds of activities that allow you to practice and have repeated exposures with words. It doesn't have to be just within a text or multiple texts because the reality is that often can't happen. In preschool, we need to do a lot of work with concrete objects, places, and events. We need to work a lot on those relational words, and this is going to be true with second language learners as well. Conjunctions, pronouns, prepositions, qualifiers, articles. We need to help students use those words with the nouns so they are beginning to see the connection. Also, relational words are so important. So children see that aunt, niece, good, bad, quickly, slowly, are all related to one another in one way or another. An aunt and a niece are related as family members. Good and bad are related because they are opposites. Quickly and very fast could be related because they are both talking about a rate of speed. So what we want to do in the early grades is really begin to work with more concrete and relational words. As we go through and as we are doing this, we want to support it with storybook reading, motivating but not enough to teach all the words. We need to, and I want to say this, we need to be reading aloud to students all the time, not just in the kindergarten and first grade. But as we are reading and using words, we need to use those words and make connections across the day with those words. This is one of those ways that you can provide repeated exposure of words by using them throughout the day. We ourselves as teachers should not be forgetting how we use words and the words we use to make ourselves models for it. And we should always use words in complete sentences and expect our students to do the same. We need to provide opportunities for explicit and implicit instruction. We need to, when we are creating definitions, use common language. Use understandable or familiar language. Do not define a word with something that is more complicated than the word itself. And I've given you an example here. And this is why dictionaries don't always work. Shelter, a place giving temporary protection from bad weather or danger. Well, now you assume children know temporary, and you assume they know protection. A place providing food and accommodations for the homeless. That's another definition from the Oxford Dictionary. An animal sanctuary. Again, a word that may well not be in a child's current vocabulary, although it's one that we might want to teach down the road. Think of a different definition. A safe place for people or animals. The rain was terrible and the wind was howling, so the people came inside the small hut for shelter. You know that the rain was going on, that it was miserable outside, that it was howling, and you can use words that you're sure your children know. So the people came inside for shelter. They were protected. Think about these definitions as you are writing them, as you are presenting them to the students, so they know the meaning of the words, and you're not asking them to figure it out without all the tools that they need. This is another one of those great little cartoons that I love. Audacity, noun. Unrestrained, impudence, 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 impudent. Adjective, marked by impertinent disrespect. Impertinent, impertinent. Children are looking up more words in order to understand the original word, and by the time they figured it out and looked up all the words, they've forgotten the original word that they're looking up. We need to make those definitions user-friendly for our students so they focus on what the meaning of the word is, not trying to figure it out from more challenging words. The greatest benefit from instructional time spent on word study can be gained from roots, prefixes, suffixes, and networks of related words. We don't have time to teach all the words that children need to learn, but we do have the opportunity to present children with tools that will help them indirectly or directly learn more vocabulary words. Why learn about roots and affixes? First, because English is made up of several 100,000 words, but they are built, those several 100,000 words are built on parts. 65% of English words are made up partly or entirely of prefixes, roots, and suffixes. That means if you learn the roots and the suffixes and the prefixes, you can figure out the meaning of words. You don't have to learn impossibility if you know possible, and the suffix y. So we need to teach our students more about the parts of language so they can have the tools to learn more words on their own. Students' awareness of morphology, prefixes, roots, and suffixes contributes to their understanding of words. And this is really important when you get into content area reading. And the roots are words parts shared by many Romance languages. That means that they come from Latin. And many second language learners, particularly Spanish-speaking language learners, can make a connection to those cognates or roots, and I'm going to share more about that with you a little bit later. We need to make vocabulary learning manageable for students, and we can do it so easily by teaching them about roots and affixes. Expanding vocabulary is not a word-by-word process. We can only teach maybe at the most about 700-800 words a year. But if you teach affixes and you teach roots, you can teach thousands of words a year. Knowing Latin and Greek roots, prefixes and suffixes provides the building blocks for increasing vocabulary. And that is so important because we want children to look at a word and say, I can figure that out. Not, oh my gosh, here's another new word and I have no idea of how to approach it. And I'm going to give you some examples of that in a minute. And highlighting roots and suffixes will support, as I noted earlier, many second language learners. Take a look. These are all affixes, prefixes and suffixes that we teach all the time. But we need to teach them in a way that our students know, once I've learned the meaning, I can attach it to any number of roots. And I think all too often what happens is, going back to that earlier point that I made, is we teach a prefix or we teach a suffix and we teach children to attach it. They do it then, they do it there, and then it's over and done with. And when they come to another word that has that root and a different prefix and a different suffix, they sort of say, oh, this is a whole new word. I have no idea how to figure that out. We need to help our students realize that a prefix and a suffix is a tool to meaning. It is not a skill that we take a test on and then move on. And there are two kinds of morphemes or of inflectional endings. One is that inflectional ending that we teach beginning at the kindergarten level. If we have the word girl, we can add an S and we have numbers. We have more than one girl, or ownership. When we add the inflectional ending walks, it tells us that it's a number. It also tells us tense. Adding ing or ed tells us it's present progressive or it's past tense. And then if we add er and est, we're going to be doing the comparison. These inflectional endings that relate to tense, possession, and comparison, and number are always suffixes. They're always suffixes. We don't have any prefixes that will talk about plurality the way adding an S does, or ownership the way adding apostrophe S does. But then when we start talking about these other prefixes and suffixes, we call them derivational morphemes or derivational affixes because they don't have a direct impact on the meaning, but they do change the part of speech. If you add AL to nation, it becomes national, and it's an adjective. When you add the plural to girls, it's still a noun. A singular girl or plural girls. When you add these derivational affixes, you're going to change the part of speech. You're going to be lover, love, lover, lovable. And we have now gone from a verb or a noun to a person who does the act to something that is lovable, an adjective. And these are derivational because they derive new words. But it's not just about at the end. If we take a look at the root port, to carry, look what happens. We can do support, supportive, supportive, unsupportive, supportivity. But it doesn't end there. Report, reporter, unreported. Look at all the words. By adding prefixes and suffixes that you can derive if you know the meaning of the root and the affixes that can be attached to those roots. This is the power of teaching word parts. This is the power of teaching word knowledge and how our word knowledge can grow and expand based upon knowing certain affixes and critical roots. We want to make connections too as we are working within and among words. Not only do we want to show students that if we know the word catastrophe, we also know the word catastrophic and catastrophically. If you know the word benefit, you know beneficial, beneficiaries, benefited, benefiting, benefits. And look at concluded or conclude, you know, concluded, concludes, concluding, conclusions. All of these you can figure out once you have the affixes and roots under your belt. But then you also want to make a different set of connections, and that's to common words that children might know. Devastation might be connected to emergency, adversity to tragedy, disaster to calamity. So build children's word knowledge using parts and using familiar words that will help them expand their vocabulary on a daily basis. And then you need to use those words in your discussion with students all the time. Shades of meaning is another wonderful way to expand children's vocabulary and make their writing so much more interesting. Instead of just saying walk over and over again, saunter, stroll, trot, parade, strut. They all can be used in different places. They are not synonyms, but they are shades of meaning of the word walk. Drink, gulp, guzzle, sip. Again, shades of meaning for drink. Laugh, giggle, howl, chuckle, grin. Look at the meanings that you get when you say giggle versus laugh. Howl, that gives you a whole different sense of what the character is doing. Or someone wore a big grin. All related, but all shades of meaning. Happy, cheerful, thrilled, delight, elated. Challenge students to come up with shades of meaning. Have them work in small groups to do this, and then have them use these in meaningful ways in discussion and in their writing. Some words have related meanings, like you can bank your money or you can go to the bank. Bank in this case, clearly related. Some words, again, are all related, but they have different forms of that familiar word. Banking, banked, they're all finance terms. Some words, like banking, to deposit money, though, have a different meaning than banking, which means to tilt or to slope. And this is where we get in to those multiple meaning words. Bank, banking, banked are all related. They don't have multiple meanings, even though one could be a bank and the other could be a verb to bank. But when you have banking, to deposit, and banking, which is to tilt or slope, like the banking on a highway or a highway that is banked, that is a multiple meaning word. And we need to teach our children these multiple meaning words, and you have them used in context. Bank is a perfect example that we just used of a multiple meaning word. Crane, you could crane your neck. There is a crane, but there's a bird that's a crane. You can type, but then there are types of things. There's current, meaning today, now, recent, and then there is the current of water. Two totally different meanings. And then we could get to bar, because you can bar someone from doing something to prevent them. You can stand at a bar and have your evening glass of wine. You can pass the bar if you're an attorney, an aspiring attorney. Bar has multiple meanings, and those are words that are all spelled the same, and they're called homonyms. But then we have those homophones, too, that are multiple meanings. They're words that sound the same, that are spelled differently, and we need to teach them. Children know about mouse, and they know about mouse. And I would venture to say today, if you ask children the meaning of mouse, they might actually talk about a computer mouse, although we seem to be losing those, too, before they would talk about the creature, a mouse. We have lock, something that will keep you from getting into something, that will keep others out. And then we have a lock of hair. Multiple meaning words. Now, many of these we might want to teach with pictures because it helps children understand. They're both nouns, lock and lock, but we need to start teaching our children that they have different meanings, and you need to look for the meaning that makes the most sense in the context in which you are reading. I mentioned earlier cognates. Just take a look here at these English words that are so directly connected to Spanish vocabulary. And we need to help our children make these connections. If you're teaching the word information, you're not teaching a whole new word to a second language learner who speaks Spanish. Información is a word that they know. And it's our responsibility to really, when we are teaching these words, take a look in the dictionary, or you can get online now so easily to find out how these, if there is a Spanish cognate that will help our children learn these words. We need to teach academic language, and I'm going to underscore this. We need to be the models for this. Instead of saying show, we need to say demonstrate. Instead of talking about the person in the story, the character in the story. When we're doing mathematics, not what is 1 and 1, but what does 1 and 1 equal? We need to use the academic language because we are the models for our children. And once we start using it, they see the value of it. It's more precise, and we want our children to take ownership of these words. Other academic language is directly connected to content area reading. And these are words we need to teach our children. They're not going to necessarily figure out the meaning of eclipse or globe or evaluate or predict. We may need to teach those words and encourage our children to use them not just in learning about reading and predict, but also learning about, as we are reading or doing science, you are going to make a prediction. When you're doing social studies and you know certain events have occurred, you may be able to make a prediction. We want our students to use these throughout the day, throughout their learning. We need to model and scaffold word use. Modeling impacts students' learning. You know, at the beginning we talked about adults and adults taking responsibility for modeling and using words and good language. We need to do the same. We need to use those words in context. And if we're teaching vocabulary words, teaching affixes, teaching roots, use them throughout the day. Create a natural opportunity for using them so students hear them and see the value. We need to scaffold word learning. Perfect example was the use of those visuals for our students to learn multiple meaning words. Scaffold helps students learn the meaning so they can use them in appropriate context. And then we need to turn the responsibility for using these words over to students. We need to expect to see them in their writing. We need to expect to hear them in their discussion. We need to expect to have students figure out the meaning of words using affixes and roots that they know. There was a catastrophe. We need to have multiple exposures and different contexts. The oil spill that killed the fish and the birds and coated beaches in thick sludge was an environmental catastrophe. That's one kind. But the party was a catastrophe because the band didn't show, the food was terrible, and the air conditioning did not work. Use them in different contexts. The more students learn high utility words, the better they'll be able to comprehend text that contains those words or similar ones. And those high utility words are the function words, they are the content words, they are the academic words, they are the words with roots and affixes that children need to learn. Vocabulary is the glue that holds stories, ideas, and content together, making comprehension accessible for all children. One of the most important things we can do, beside teaching children the tools to learn new words, is to have our students read, read, and read. And we need to provide that time throughout the day. We know, and these numbers have held, the more students read, the higher they score in reading. A child reading 20 minutes a day, 20 minutes, is going to learn 1.8 million words. A child reading 4.6 minutes a day, almost 5 minutes, will learn 282 words a day. And if you read less than a minute a day, you may learn 8,000 words. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Our knowledge of words determine how we understand text, define ourselves for others, and define the way we see the world. Vocabulary, knowledge of words are the essence of who we are. They help us learn, they help us share ideas, and they help us enjoy the world in which we live. And remember, sometimes I lie awake at night and I ask, where have I gone wrong? And then a voice says to me, this is going to take more than one night. We are part of a total community, we as educators, to teach children vocabulary, to build vocabulary knowledge, to develop word consciousness throughout not just the day, throughout the year, throughout all the years in school that we are working with students, so it becomes really an integral part of their very, very being and the way they see the world. Thank you all very, very much.
Great. Thank you, Marcia. I just have one question in the Q&A, and I just want to remind participants today that if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A chat box, and we will say them aloud and ask Marcia for her input. Margaret did have one question. She said, how do you support challenged readers to understand the meaning of new words if they're not researched in the dictionary?
Can you just, you're a little soft on the phone.
Oh, sorry. Is this better?
That's much better.
Okay, great. So Margaret asks, how do you support challenged readers to understand the meaning of new words if they have not researched it in the dictionary?
Well, I think one of the most important things is, again, I want to go back to a point I made earlier, which is scaffolding. We need to identify, as children are reading, the key words that they need to know beforehand. Pre-teaching is scaffolding. Once we pre-teach those words, we don't want children to have to go to the dictionary to find them as they're reading. But to go back, I would even leave the definitions on the board so they can go back. And one of the great things is to actually have them substitute in their own words the definition for that word as they are reading. Pre-teaching is going to be critical as a scaffolding tool. Visuals, when you can do it, is going to be critical. Once the word is taught, provide multiple opportunities. One, for the student to put it in his or her own words, so she or he has ownership. To use that word in a meaningful sentence, and I mean meaningful. And it's an easy thing, interestingly, to get children to do that. So let's say the word is imperative. It's a big word, let's say 3rd, 4th grade. So you teach the word imperative, something that is very important that needs to be done. And you'll say, ask a student to use it in a sentence, and they'll say, it's an imperative. Well, that tells you nothing. So one of the things we want to do is encourage our students to say why it's an imperative. It's an imperative because the storm was coming and they needed to get indoors. That shows greater meaning of the word, and there's a higher probability that the children are going to remember it. Ask children for examples of something that might be an imperative. To get out of a thunderstorm might be an imperative. To run out of a building that's on fire, that's an imperative. Have them give the examples. Have them begin to take ownership of what is an imperative. These are things that they're not going to learn it the first time, but having them look it up in the dictionary is probably going to mean that they're not going to learn it at all.
Okay, great. If no one else has any questions, I think we're good to go. So thank you so much for attending the webinar, and thank you, Marcia, for your time today. We'll be sending a follow-up email with the link to the recording in the slides for everyone who participated and registered today. And we appreciate your participation, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.